Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The title of my talk today is Artificial Intelligence from a Biomedical Engineering Perspective. My name is Professor Yasser Mustafa Qatah. The topics in this seminar will include basic definition of artificial intelligence, the technologies and tools used in this area, example biomedical engineering artificial intelligence system, so that we can basically get into the how this technology is applied to biomedical engineering. Then I'm going to talk about the unique challenges that are present in the biomedical engineering area that are a little bit difficult to basically address than the other areas. Then I'm going to just talk briefly about the potential strengths in using AI in biomedical engineering, and then I'm going to have some concluding remarks about what we talked about in this talk. Artificial intelligence covers a broad band of technologies involving complex tasks that normally would require human intervention. It has so many different applications in biomedical engineering, including basically medical image analysis, including drug discovery, AI medical diagnosis. It has some other managerial things like nursing assistant, like basically if you have medical data security, if you have medical risk prediction in like insurance companies, things of that sort, and also in managing clinical trials. Basically, it has so many different applications, but we have to be sure that this technology is appropriate for each one of these technologies or each one of these applications. We can classify artificial intelligence into three main areas, or basically three main stages. The first one is what's called the narrow intelligence or narrow artificial intelligence. Basically, it's mainly concerned with machine learning. Basically, it's an artificial intelligence system that specializes in one area and solves one very particular problem. Basically, most of the AI systems we have right now belong to this stage here. There was like an ambition for the technology to become artificial general intelligence. Basically, this is the artificial intelligence system that would act like a human being. Like basically, it can learn new things basically on its own. It can basically, you can start with a very specific application, but actually it can generalize the application. It can learn as very much as a human being. This is a little bit theoretical right now, and we are very far away from achieving this at this point. The third stage, which is even beyond that, which is called artificial superintelligence. In this case, actually talking about machine consciousness. Basically, you're talking about a machine that knows about itself, okay, like that can basically have a similar consciousness as a human being. This is kind of in the realm of science fiction right now, because basically it's like something that is really very far away from where we are right now, because as of this time, we are not sure how the human consciousness works. So basically, if we are not sure how human consciousness works, how are we going to develop machines that have this consciousness? So basically, this is like a very far away goal, but actually it's from where we are right now, it seems like it's a very far away goal from what we have right now. One major problem of artificial intelligence is that it has a problem in terminology. Okay, we said before that the AI covers a broad set of technologies. Basically, you hear about different terminologies that are used, like for example, deep learning, machine learning, artificial intelligence, convolutional neural networks, things of that sort. And basically, which one means what? Okay, this is a big problem. Currently, there is no universal terminology covering AI solutions for healthcare applications in particular. Okay, but actually, we can suggest that it might basically be developed based on a simple and high-level approach to categorization that could be used in different areas, based on different criteria, like complexity, like impact and benefits, like clinical situation. But right now, basically, if you're talking about a particular AI system, it's sometimes very difficult to basically understand what the person is talking about, because sometimes when you're talking about artificial intelligence, you would mean something that is very basic as regression, for example. And basic, you can mean something that is very complex like deep learning. So basically, we have to start thinking about how to standardize the terminologies and the categorization of the technologies involved in AI, particularly for medical applications. Uh, in general, people basically consider artificial intelligence as the umbrella for all the technologies that are involved, that basically involves programs that can sense, reason, act, and adapt. Okay? A subcategorization or subclass of artificial intelligence would be machine learning, which is basically a system that could be trained over time or trained on data so that it can actually improve over time. Deep learning is a very special class of machine learning, which is based on very deep neural networks. We're going to talk about how this works in a second, but basically this is a subclass of machine learning. In order for us to be able to use artificial intelligence, we have to have tools, we have to have programming tools that would allow us to do that. Okay? On one side, we have MATLAB, we have a deep learning toolbox, we have machine learning functions. We have so many things that we have in MATLAB, but the problem is we have to have licensing for MATLAB, and we have to have it for product development and deployment. If you're going to deploy a product based on MATLAB, I think you will have to have a license. And by the way, the academic license is much cheaper than the industrial license, basically. If you're going to have a product with MATLAB, then you have to really think about how much you have to pay for having this software in your company. This is really going to be a concern. On the other side, you have the open source community. You have Python, you have OpenCV, you have TensorFlow, you have a lot of tools actually, and most of the people working on research in AI, they actually use the open source tools that are available from the open source community. Okay. The problem with open source is that right now the hackers are not waiting for softwares to come and basically find the bugs or find the exploits in these packages. They are basically involved in the open source community right now, and basically they inject or basically put some code in each one of the or several of the very popular packages that are available for programming, and basically you would end up having a problem or a concern about the cyber security of your application. So this is a very big problem. In order to solve this problem, you have to have what's called software bill of material. Software bill of material is basically a list of all the dependencies in your program, in your open source program. So basically, whenever you use a package, or basically use a package that uses another package, you have to actually list all of these. So that when people discover a problem or an exploit in one of these packages, you would learn about that and fix it in your code. Okay, so basically, this is definitely, it's open source, it's for free. You can basically get started working on AI right away without, basically with minimal cost. You just have to have the computing hardware. But the problem would be in the potential cybersecurity risk. In addition, of course, as open source, basically you have no control over the versioning. For example, for Python, if you have Python 2 or Python 1, you have differences between Python 2 and Python 1, basically. And basically, some of the code might not be compatible. So basically, you have to, whenever you start building a project, you have to stick with a particular version until you finish, and then address the differences that might come in later versions one by one, after that. Since most of the impressive results that came out, and basically motivated people to use AI came from deep learning, we're going to just give a brief idea about what deep learning is and how it is constructed, basically. The solutions based on deep learning are based on neural networks, and neural networks actually try to emulate or simulate the actual neurons that are present in the brain. Basically, in the brain, you have billions of neurons that are interacting together, and together they actually do all the functions that we do in the brain, which are basically this is the intelligence, the natural intelligence we have comes from the interaction between neurons. So people try to simulate the neurons. Basically, the actual construction or actual anatomy of a neuron is like a cell body, and you have an axon, and you have what's called basically terminals here. Okay, you have here dendrites that would actually interface to axon terminals from another neuron. So basically, the signals comes from here and goes to the cell body where it's processed, and then it is sent on this cable. It's basically it's a myelinated axon, for example. Basically where actual signal gets transmitted here and basically interface to another neuron through the axon terminal. So basically the idea is very simple. Basically, if you want to simulate this, basically you have to have inputs, and basically each one of these inputs might have a weight because each one of these dendrites might have a different path, and basically it would basically weigh or put a weight on the input based on this path, for example. And then it goes into a processing unit here with a function that takes basically the inputs from here and applies a particular function on these inputs and produces the output. If you want to make it a little bit simpler, basically there is a summing junction here where you multiply the weight by the input. So you have W1 x1 and W2 x2 and just add them together. At this stage, you have a linear system. Linear system cannot really produce something that would be very useful because basically at the end, if you add several linear systems together, you will end up being one linear system. But actually, if you add the nonlinearity here, if you add a nonlinearity that looks like a sigmoid function, for example, you will end up with something really useful. Okay, so basically a nonlinearity here can be added, and this nonlinearity can be selected between several functions, including a sigmoid function, for example, and then the output is produced. Neural networks started very simple. Okay, they had an input layer, an output layer, and what's called a hidden layer. The hidden layer is basically whatever is in between the input and the output, because basically if you look at the neural network, you consider it as a black box. You don't really know what's going on inside. You see only the input side and the output side. So basically whatever is inside here is hidden. And basically this very simple neural network was very useful, and people used it for basically now, we can say that more than 30 years now in classification of basic classification tasks in different areas. But the breakthrough came when people started putting a lot of, a lot more hidden layers in between the input and the output. Okay, so basically if you have a deep learning neural network, you have so many different layers in between here. And basically when you do that, you start seeing a lot of improvement in the results. Okay, and you can handle basically very complicated classification problems, and basically you start getting the impressive results that we see in different applications. So basically we have a model. We actually, the deep neural network model is already there. People know it, okay? Why isn't it working for everything? Basically, the main thing about any model is that you have to have great data, and you have to have really good data in order for this model to be trained properly, in order for it to basically be useful later on. So basically, if you have the greatest model in the world, and you apply it or train it using garbage data, you would expect to have garbage results, okay? So basically, this is a very big problem in all areas, basically. You have to make sure that whatever you have for your data, in order to train the model, is very close to what you have in reality, so that the benefit of the model can be actually, or the potential of the model can be realized. In biomedical engineering in particular, we start seeing now some differences between biomedical and other areas. We have so many different databases for different clinical applications. For example, we have digital database for screening mammography, DDSM database, which is very popular. It has 2,500 cases. Cases means that 2,500 patients or basic images from patients. You have Mammographic Image Analysis Society database, you have 322 images. For in-breast full field digital mammographic database, it's 410. The difference between this one and the other two is that the other two here were based on film. Now everything is digital. now, basically, since it's digital, it's better to actually develop the systems based on digital data. So basically, this is one of the first digital mammographic databases that are currently available for research. It has 410 images only. You have other databases for skin cancer, for example, like the ISIC database, melanoma classification database. It has 44,000, a little bit more than 44,000 images. You have the Long Image Database Consortium Image Collection, LIDC database. It's about a little bit more than 1,000 cases. You have the STARE database for analysis of the retina. It's about 400 cases. You have the diabetic retinopathy classification challenge database. You have about a little bit more than 88,000 images. You have the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative. Basically, it's about a little bit more than 1,800 cases. Basically, if you compare these, any of these actually, if you compare it to whatever is used in other applications, like for example, ImageNet, you have more than 14 million images. If you imagine that if you have a deep learning neural network, you have a lot of parameters. So basically, you have to have a lot of basic data points so that you can actually train these parameters without having the problem of overfitting. Overfitting meaning that you're using a model that has a much higher order than the data points that you have. And this is potentially a very dangerous problem for the system because basically you can get very good results in your training, but when you actually apply it to real cases, you end up having very poor results. So this is one of the first concerns we have in biomedical engineering. The cases are very scarce. You don't have that many images, you don't have that many, for example, samples from biomedical clinical data, basically. Because basically, clinical data are very much protected, and it's very difficult to actually collect data that is acquired in a particular way so that it can be coherent, okay? Basically, it's very difficult to, after you collect the data, it's very difficult to actually label them. In order for you to be able to label them, you have to have experts, and basically these experts will basically label each part of the image and basically use that to train the model. This is actually very difficult. So basically, we have problems as far as the data in biomedical engineering. So in biomedical data, we try to do what's called augmentation. Augmentation, we try to increase the size of our data. This can be done with, or has been done using affine transformation of data, where we actually do rotation, reflection, translation, scaling, things of that sort. Just apply an affine transformation to the images, for example, okay? So if you have an image that looks like this, we basically end up with images that look like this. Basically, it's different versions of this exact image, but actually having an affine transformation applied to them. To the deep learning system, it will consider each one of these as a different image because each one of these points will be connected to an input node. So basically, when you change the points, will change where this point is, then the system would consider it as a different image. So basic can be very useful actually to increase the size of your data by a factor that is equal to the number of affine transformations that you have. Sometimes actually you add the translation. As the translation, basically you just shift the image a little bit. Okay, the scaling also can be applied because basically if you scale the image of a tumor, it would still look as a tumor to the doctor. So basically it would actually serve as a proper sample for an abnormality, for example. Sometimes you like to also add distortions, like a little bit of noise, like cropping, like blurring, like geometric and color distortion. For example, you have, the image that looks like this. We can actually apply some deformation to the image so that it looks a little bit different. You can actually add a little bit of changes in the coloring of the image. For example, here the dynamic range is a little different between these images, like here, for example. So basically, when you do distortions, you just have to make sure that whatever comes out of the distortion would actually be classified by the doctor as the same original abnormality or the same original classification of the image that you applied the distortion to. So basically, you can also basically add more images if you actually apply certain distortions that are acceptable. The new thing, basically, these two actually have been applied since the start of applications of deep learning in biomedical engineering, but this last one here is still in development, where people actually try to have synthetic data. They use the original data in order to basically have a simulation program, create images that would actually be classified by the doctors as the same abnormality or the same classification of the original image. This is kind of debatable because sometimes you can actually add, or at least make the images in such a way to make the classification look good. Like basically, people do that in things like adversarial example, for example. So basically, we have to make sure that the synthetic data is done in a way that is basically totally independent and basically totally randomized, so that we have output images that are very much usable as independent data points. Okay, this is still in development, and people are not really approving whatever comes out of systems based on synthetic data as of now. But actually, this can be a very good solution, because this would open the way to having basically as many images as we want. So basically, this would be a very good solution, but we have to still work on it a little bit more in order for it to be mature enough to become useful in realistic applications. One other solution that can be used to address the lack of data is what's called transfer learning. If you consider a realistic deep learning system, the number of parameters to be estimated is, for example, can be between 7 million and 138 million parameters. 7 million is like GoogleNet. 138 million is like VGG16, for example. You have in the middle something called AlexNet. AlexNet is about 60 something, a little bit more than 60 million parameters. So basically, you have a lot of parameters to estimate. If you're trying to estimate all these parameters using, for example, 400 images or 322 images like the mini-mice or mice database, this is kind of difficult. And definitely overfitting would be a major problem in this case. So people had an observation that you have basically for the deep neural networks, you have actually, most people use something called convolutional neural networks at the beginning, and then you have fully connected layer at the end. Okay, for fully connected layers at the end. So basically, if you look at the output from the convolutional layers at the beginning, you will find that they are very much independent of the kind of data you use. For example, people train the same network with faces, with cars, with elephants, with chairs, and basically, as you go deeper, you basically find that basically the deeper layer would actually end up looking like, for example, very similar. These look very similar between the different applications, basically. Okay, so basically you have different basic features that are present in all images, like edges, for example. Okay, and use these to basically train the network to classify these objects, whatever they are. So the idea here was we can basically get the first layers, the layers that are not relevant to the particular data we use, and basically transfer them as is. So basically, we can use a GoogleNet, for example, or AlexNet that is trained on the huge ImageNet database that has 40 million images, and basically just transfer the first few layers as is. And then in the final layers that classify the particular object that we have, for example, here we have different like tiger, like cat, whatever. Okay, we can actually train the final layers only with our own particular data, so that we can basically, instead of having like 100 or 1,000 classes like in ImageNet, for example, you have only malignant and benign. And when you do that, you have a very good network that actually, with the parameters here, most of the parameters were actually trained by a very large database, and basically only adapted or customized to the particular application we have in biomedical engineering in the last few layers. Like, for example, the fully connected layers and the classification layer at the end where you have the classes, basically. So basically, this can be a very good solution whenever you don't have enough data to train the whole network with your data. If you have enough data, definitely go for it. Go for training the whole thing. But actually, if you don't have enough data, then you just have to do transfer learning so that you can minimize the problem of overfitting. Many researchers actually observed that in many AI systems, it's not enough to just have the AI system working by itself. There is an importance for having a human being, or what's called human in the loop, where the human actually observes the operation of the neural network and basically adjusts for any obvious deviations that might come up from the training of the data or from the output of the system, for example. Let me give you a very clear example to see how important this is in a very basic task. And you can imagine that this example would actually carry on to the diagnostic problem in biomedical engineering. If you have a student and an AI system asked to basically you give them the data from a resistance. We have the current and the voltage waveforms from a resistance. You have as many points as you want here, okay? And basically you ask the student and the deep learning system to basically come up with the model that would actually describe this data, basically, okay? For the AI, it would try to minimize the mean square error. So basically it comes out like this, because you actually have so many different parameters. You can actually have a curve with an infinite or a very large order, and you can basically make all the points actually, or make the curve that comes out of the model that you develop from the AI system pass through all the points. And basically, this is a big problem because this is not really what we should have in reality. What we have in reality, if you have a smart student like our students, basically you would realize that this is a resistance. So the model should follow what's called Ohm's laws. It should look like a linear system. So basically, the student would right away develop or estimate the linear as a straight line that passes through the points and minimize the mean square error. Okay, so basically, this is what's called Occam's razor. Occam's razor basically talks about that the simplest solution or the simplest model is usually the right one and generalizes better. So basically, this model actually will generalize much better than this one here. Okay, so this one here is good, this one here is bad. And basically, without a human observing the performance of the AI system, you would end up having things of that sort. But unfortunately, for very large deep neural networks, it's very difficult to observe them. Okay, here because the data is only two-dimensional, you have a one-dimensional data. Basically, actually, you have a variable, a dependent variable, and an independent variable, and that's it. For deep neural networks, you have thousands of input variables. And you have, as we saw, millions of parameters. So it's extremely difficult to observe if things like that happen. But we can observe things of that like that when they happen because of the overfitting that we see in the results. So basically, if we give the model another point, for example, or basically tested the model with independent data, the data that the model didn't see before, we would realize very clearly that we have a problem in our model. So basically, we have to have a man in the loop or a human in the loop in order for us to be able to regularize the operation of the neural network. Okay, for diagnostic, basic diagnostic cases, for example, it's not enough for the AI system to just basically give a diagnosis and we accept it. It doesn't work that way. We have to have a human doctor that would look at the data, look at the output from the AI, and then confirm the output of the AI or dismiss it, okay, based on the clear or obvious problems that he sees in the data. So basically, this is very important. Having a human in the loop with AI systems is very much a clear, mandate in biomedical engineering applications. Now we're going to consider a very particular AI example from biomedical engineering, which is computer-aided diagnosis, in order for us to understand a little better how AI systems are utilized and how they can fall into problems, without even basically, technically, we don't see how it can happen, but actually, in reality, such problems can happen. So if you consider, for example, computer-aided diagnosis of mammography, basically we acquire two X-ray images that are acquired from two different angles, usually craniocaudal and mediolateral oblique images, and they are inspected for malignant lesions. Usually, the reading process is very tiring, it's very lengthy, it's very costly because doctors are paid, the hourly rate of doctors is really high, and definitely prone to errors because basically not because of the doctor expertise, which is actually a factor, but actually because of the level of basically, if you have the image presented to the doctor at the beginning of the day is different from presenting the same images after 8 hours of reading, basically, okay? The doctors get tired, and basically their performance changes with time. So another problem that would actually complicate this is that we have a shortage of radiologists, okay? The radiologists actually are among the specialties with very few doctors, okay? And basically, the shortage of radiologists actually is even compounded more by the increase in the volume of data. Now, imaging systems are everywhere. We have, instead of 2D images, we have 3D volumes. So basically, we have many more images for the doctor to read every day, and we still have, we don't really have enough radiologists available to do that. So basically, it would make sense to have a system that would assist, not replace, assist the doctor, okay? Which is really important, okay? Just to be able to also, motivate our development of computer-aided diagnostic systems, malignant lesion detection rates are between 77 and 87%, depending on a lot of things, including the physicians, okay? So basically, among physicians, the average rate is basically maybe 80%, okay? The problem is that we have a substantial inter-physician variation. So basically, if you look at doctors, if you look at individual doctors, the rate might be between 29% and 97%, depending on the experience, which is really a very wide variation. And so people use double reading to improve the performance. It's not enough for one doctor to read the image. Usually two doctors, if you can have two doctors read the image, it would actually improve the performance because it might basically allow one of the doctors to at least catch the problem in the images, okay? So basically, this is very important. So basically, this is another factor because we are now doubling the effective volume of the images because each image has to be read by two doctors, not just one. Okay, so basically from this we can see that computer-aided diagnostic systems can be very useful as a second reader, for example. Okay, so basically you can read the images and the physician reads the images, and then we compare the two. The doctor actually looks at the report from the CAD system, and basically if he misses something or he actually observes something that wasn't there in the computer-aided diagnostic system output, it would still be caught, and basically the diagnosis would come out right. In order for us to build a CAD system for such application as mammography, we have to have a database. And this database, as we saw, we don't have so many images, but we have to actually divide what we have into three different categories. We have to have a learning set, and we have to have a cross-validation set, and a testing set. The learning set would be used to teach the system how to work. The cross-validation would actually help optimize the parameters of the system while it is in training. So basically, I basically use the learning data and then test it on the cross-validation. If it doesn't work properly, then I adjust the parameters and work again, and basically keep working in this cycle until I get useful results or good results. Then, in order for the system to be tested properly, we have to use independent testing data that the system never saw before. So basically, we use testing data to catch such things as overfitting. Okay, so the results from the testing data would be the actual results that would be expected from the system. We usually take these images and pre-process them. There are a lot of things that can be done, including density correction, including if you have some kind of noise, for example, you can actually do some denoising. And then you enter that into the machine learning system, which can be basic statistical learning system or a deep learning module. If it's a statistical learning system, then you have to extract features. You have to select which features are useful, and then you have to design classifiers to basically use these features to classify the different classes in your data. If it's a deep learning module, then basically all these are included in the black box where we actually enter the data and basically get the output right away. We don't really design these things on our own. They are basically learned from the data. After that, we have to have what's called performance metrics. People think about the accuracy as the performance metrics, but actually, as we were going to see, this is not enough. In biomedical engineering, it's very difficult to have a misclassification if the case was positive and you classify it as negative. Then, for mammography, for example, the woman would go and get a clean bill of health and sent home, and then comes back in a year or so with a much worse case, and might not be able to basically do much at this point, at this later point. So basically, we have to have differences between we definitely have true positive, we have true negatives. This is what's called the confusion matrix, and we have false positives and we have false negatives. Okay, for the false positives, it means that the woman would be basically told that she has a problem, and she might have to end up doing a lot of further investigation that might be invasive. But at the end, she will be told that nothing is wrong. So basically, everything is okay. Here, for the false negatives, this is a bigger problem where you actually tell the woman that she's okay, and she goes home and basically stays for more time, like a year or so, and comes back with a deteriorated case that might not be basically treated at this time. So basically, this is a big problem. So in order for us to be able to not just add these over the whole thing just to get the accuracy, we need to actually discriminate the false negatives and the false positives. We can do that with the so-called sensitivity and specificity. Sensitivity, or the true positive rate, is basically the true positive over the true positive plus false negative. Okay, so basically this is the reference standard. This is the true, okay, cases. All these cases are actually supposed to be positive. So basically we have to have all of these as TP. So when I divide TP plus over TP plus Fn, I basically got the percentage of the actual women with cancer that I was able to say that they have cancer. Okay, this is very important. The specificity, on the other hand, looks at the negatives, basically. It's the ability to identify the absence of the disease. So basically here it's Tn over Tn plus Fp. So basically the specificity means that when it's high, then basically I can identify the normal cases from the false positives, basically. These two are called the pretest matrix, or pretest parameters. And basically, whenever a woman is going to do an investigative radiology, for example, it chooses the particular test that provides the highest sensitivity and highest specificity. Okay, so basically this is very important. Okay, after the woman does the radiology and basically the results comes out, the result from this particular technique comes out, we have what's called post-test parameters or post-test metrics or measures. Okay, we have the positive predictive value and the negative predictive value. This talks about the reliability of the positive results, meaning that if I get a positive result, what is the percentage, what is the likelihood that this positive result is actually positive? Okay, if we have a system that would give basically all the cases as positive, for example, then a lot of cases might come out positive, but they are actually negative. So basically, this would give you the reliability of the results of the positive result in particular. For the negative predictive value, you talk about the negative results. And this is very important. Let's give a very specific numerical example so that we can actually realize the importance of these kinds of measures. If we have a CAD system, if we design a CAD system, and basically this CAD system had a sensitivity of 95% and specificity of 80%. Meaning that if we have, for example, 100 cases with cancer, it would detect 95 of them. If you have 100 cases that are normal, it would say to 80 of them that they are normal, okay? And basically we use this system twice. And we use it in a situation called clinical mammography once and a screening mammography once. Clinical mammography, where you have symptomatic patient, a patient that comes with a complaint, for example, a mass. She has a mass, okay? So we would like to use clinical mammography in order for us to identify whether this mass is benign or malignant, okay? So in this case, for symptomatic patients, there is a very important parameter called disease prevalence. The percentage of symptomatic patients that might have a problem or might have cancer is 50%, okay? Because they have a lump, and this lump is like 50-50. It's basically 50% normal, 50% abnormal. On the other hand, if you have asymptomatic patients for screening mammography, like the screening programs that people actually adapt these days, where women go every year or every couple of years to do mammography just to make sure that no initial signs of cancer appear in the mammograms, and if they appear, they can actually catch them later, early on, and basically treat them before they become a problem. So the disease prevalence in this case is only 3%. If you do the numbers, if you basically crunch the numbers here, you develop the confusion matrix first and then compute the positive predictive value and negative predictive value here, you see that here the positive predictive value is about 82.6%. The negative predictive value is 94.1%. The meaning of this, the positive predictive value here, is basically different from, very much different from here. We have the positive predictive value here is at 12.8%. And negative predictive value here is still high, over 90%, 99.8%. The meaning for this is that based on this, these results, for every healthy woman with cancer, for every healthy woman, for every 5 women with cancer, you have 1 healthy woman, because you actually have the percentage almost 80%, meaning that there is an error of 20%. It means that if you say that this woman has cancer, basically 1 out of 5 basically would be actually diagnosed with cancer, but she doesn't have cancer. This woman actually will have to endure a diagnostic workup and possible needle biopsy, which is kind of an invasive procedure. Just get a sample from the location of the lump, just to make sure that it's benign or malignant. It's sent to the lab and basically analyzed for cancer signs. And in this particular case, since this woman has a lump and want to make sure that this lump is benign, she would not mind that. Because basically the results that come out from the lab testing is basically the gold standard. It's 100% accurate that if it's okay, if it's benign or malignant, then it's final decision now. It's now, it doesn't have to actually worry about this anymore. So basically, in this case, it can be acceptable for the woman, okay? And doesn't consider the additional workup that she will have to endure or the needle biopsy as useless. Basically, you consider them actually as necessary to make sure that she's fine, that she will be diagnosed with the right diagnosis. On the other hand, here, you have the positive predictive value of 12.8%. Meaning that for every woman that has cancer, 7 healthy women are basically diagnosed with cancer incorrectly. This is a big problem. Meaning that basically each time you're going to have a round of screening mammography, about 20 to 25%, basically the false positives here, see here it's about very close to 2,000 out of the 10,000 cases here. So basically, these will be called back, okay, in order for them to get some further testing, okay? And this is basically a very large percentage. For example, if you have after 4 or 5 rounds, almost every woman will have to be recalled, basically. So basically, yeah, for every woman, every normal woman, every healthy woman, she would have to do testing every 5 years, further testing, which is really unnecessary. Okay, this poses workflow problems, economic costs, and loss of confidence in the screening program. If the woman goes to the screening program and knows that the results would really come positive most of the time without being correctly so basically this would be a big problem. So basically, in this case, we can consider the first one here, the condition here, the same system here applied to clinical mammography to be very acceptable. The same system, the same CAT system applied to screening mammography would be unacceptable. So there are things beyond the design of the system, the CAT system itself, or the technical parameters of the CAT system itself, like, for example, disease prevalence, that would affect the acceptability of the system in biomedical engineering. So this has to be taken into consideration. If you're going to develop a CAT system, a computer-aided diagnosis system for a particular application or a particular area even, okay, you have to actually study the disease prevalence in this area, and you have to adjust the design of your system so that the sensitivity and specificity would provide acceptable outcome for that particular application or that particular area. This shows the importance of local development of AI systems, not just getting AI systems that are basically one size fits all, as they say. So the AI systems can serve basically in different areas in the radiology. Right now, the commercial systems of CAD, they have about basic sensitivity of about 85%. And basically, this is very close or a little bit higher than the average radiographer. And so basically, you can consider it as a second reader, basically. It can be used in a different ways. It can be used as pre-screening, where basically the CAD system would basically go over the images and outline the areas that the doctor might need to look at, the suspicious areas. Okay, so basically it would make the life of the radiologist a little bit easier. It can serve as a concurrent reader. So basically for the pre-screening, the doctor starts from the outcome of the AI system or the CAD system. Here, no, it's basically the work in parallel. You don't see what each other are doing, and basically at the end, you try to reconcile the reports from both. Okay, so basically in this case, it can work as a second independent reader. Or it can be used as an interactive AI-based CAD system, where basically the doctor would outline the area where he's suspicious about, and then the CAD system would analyze and give him a percentage of or a probability of basically this area being cancer, and basically makes his decision at the end based on that. Which one of these can be used, or which one of these is better, is a subject of debate between doctors or the medical community in general, but actually at least they are there, and basically we can choose one of them for a particular application that would best suit that particular application. There are several unique challenges for AI in healthcare or in biomedical engineering in general. The first one, as we saw, is the data size and overfitting. We have much smaller data sets than other applications, and this basically would cause the problem of overfitting. So basically, we have to start thinking about data augmentation techniques, or try to basically advance the field of data augmentation in order for us to solve this problem in biomedical engineering. We have the big problem in data imbalance. We have many more normal cases than abnormal. Alhamdulillah, we don't have as many disease cases as the normals. So basically, this is a good thing in general, but actually for AI systems, this is a big problem, because whenever you have data imbalance in your input, then the design of the AI system would actually be biased towards the class that has the most data. You also have wide physiological variability of normal cases, which basically makes the normal class very wide, actually. It can actually look like multiple classes, not just one class, which makes basically causes ambiguity in the classification part. You have also a big problem in the dependence on data acquisition parameters. If you consider, for example, ultrasound imaging or MRI, you have so many different parameters that can be used, and depending on these parameters, the images would look very different. For example, in MRI, you have basically you have at least 4 different contrasts in MRI, and basically these 4 contrasts you would provide for the same patient, for the same location, very different images. And so if you want to have a particular AI system trained on these data, it's going to be extremely difficult. You have to basically choose a very particular way of acquisition or standard acquisition parameters, and basically use these acquisition parameters whenever you are trying to use images for the AI system. Okay, so this is a big problem. You have definitely knowledge gaps and overfitting, which results from imperfect sampling of the populations. Basically, sometimes you have very few cases. Basically, it's related to data imbalance, but actually, this is a little bit related to the disease prevalence, for example. And basically, this can happen in communities where we don't have any enough samples for a particular disease. So basically, whenever it comes or whenever a new disease comes, it becomes difficult for the AI to identify it. So basically, this is a big problem. We don't really have, in medical community in general, or the biomedical engineering applications in general, it's very difficult to do perfect sampling of populations. Okay, the populations are not uniform, so they are not even accessible to us sometimes. So basically, it's sometimes difficult to do the perfect samples, the perfect sampling that would be required to build a useful AI system. There are also unique legal and ethical issues in AI use. Okay, the first one is basically that AI introduces potential for automation bias, where the professional judgment can be influenced by recommendation of AI solution. When we said that the application of AI can be as pre-reading, okay? Basically, this can be actually a problematic thing if the doctor would consider the AI outcome as basically something that has a confidence. Basically, if he has confidence in the system beyond his own expertise, then it can be a problem. So this is a real problem in medical diagnosis, where the doctor can actually be influenced by the outcome of an AI system. Another big problem in the medical applications is that you have to manage accountability, okay? Meaning that who is accountable for the outcomes of the AI system, okay? You have to have an agreement for the liability and framework for incident reporting. So liability meaning that if the AI outcome was incorrect, who's going to pay for the, basically if you have a liability for the patient, if you cause damage to the patient and the patient filed a lawsuit, and basically the hospital might be fined, or basically somebody has to be responsible for the damages that occur to the patient. So basically, there should be an agreement between whoever develops an AI system and the place where the AI system will be applied, so that this liability can be very clear. And also, whenever an incident happens, whenever a situation where actually an incorrect diagnosis caused harm, or basically an incorrect diagnosis was discovered, there should be a framework for incident reporting, so that these kinds of incidents can later on use to improve the outcome of the AI system. And we have to also emphasize that the AI regulations are separate from those of professional or ethical practices. Meaning that basically if the doctor decides to use an AI system, regardless of the outcome of the AI system, okay, he's still accountable, because basically he's the responsible professional who is in charge of a particular patient. So basically the hospital and the clinicians are still accountable for the decision they make, including the use of AI. So this is extremely important to be kept in mind, because the doctor cannot say that it's basically it's the AI system that said so and I have nothing to do with it. It's not like that. Basically, it's his decision at the end. We developed AI systems that are assistants to the doctor. They are not replacing the doctors. So basically, it's the decision of the doctor, at the end, and it's the accountability that lies on the doctor and the hospital at the end. There are also some unique challenges on the regulatory side. We're talking now about somebody who developed an AI system and wants to basically push it into the market, push it as a product. In order for us to have a medical software, we have to actually get an approval from, for example, here we have the Saudi FDA, in the US it's the FDA, in Europe you have to have CE mark or CA approval. Right now, the way the regulation of such devices happen is very much like what they do with hardware devices. So basically, the standard approach is called software as a medical device, SAMD. Okay, so basically, they apply almost the same standards for medical devices, the hardware medical devices, to the software. Okay, AI definitely has new challenges compared to the regular devices. Basically, you have a problem in autonomy, basically being working on its own, making a decision on its own. Continuous learning, how if sometimes actually you allow the AI system to continuously learn while it's at its site. So basically, this is an issue that wasn't there before. You don't have any medical devices that continuously learn, after you install them. And you have a problem with explainability. Basically, you have to explain the outcome. Basically, how you came up with this outcome. If you made a wrong decision or make a wrong diagnosis, for example, can you explain why? Okay, this is a big problem actually for such intelligent systems like deep learning, for example. It's extremely difficult to get an explainable system. So basically, you have to actually start thinking about these things in order for, and these things actually we don't have a solution actually as far as regulation of such things. Okay, so at this time we have no standards that cover the definition, the development, deployment, and maintenance of AI in healthcare. So basically we're using standards that were applied for other applications. You basically look at, for example, quality, risk management, usability, safety, life cycle, things of that sort that apply to every medical device. But for AI, you have unique challenges that should be actually addressed in a unique standard. This is not here yet. There are other unique challenges related to validation and versioning. For example, if you're trying to test a particular medical device to be safe, you have certain standards like the ISO 14971, the quality management for in manufacture like 13485, ISO 13485, and basically they are very much, if you follow these, it's very straightforward basically. The problem for AI solutions is that it's not as simple. You can apply definitely risk management in AI solutions, definitely, but actually how you're going to apply it is very different, okay? One of the unique differences is that if you develop your own system, you develop based on your own data. And usually your own data is basically the soul of your product. This is basically the know-how of your product. If somebody else gains access to your data, then he might actually develop a better solution, okay, than yours, okay? So basically, your system is as good as the data you have. So when you present your system to the regulatory agency, you cannot present the data. It's actually, you're giving your know-how, you're disclosing your know-how, and basically this can be very dangerous, actually, okay? So basically, how would a regulatory agency evaluate a ready-made or a product in AI, okay, without having the data, okay? Basically, we have, basically you have to actually discuss the adequacy of the training and validation data used in the development. You can say that we used this number and we got these data from this particular place and it was labeled like this, things of that sort, but actually there is no way of confirming that they are actually, the way they are. And basically, if you want to test it, if you want to test a medical device for electrical safety, there is a device that you can apply to the medical device and basically get the measure of whatever parameters you want. Here, if you want to test a particular system, would you be able to have your own data set to be able to basically apply the AI solution to the data you have and basically have a uniform way or a coherent way of evaluating different solutions from different manufacturers. This is not really yet sorted out. It's basically people are still thinking how to do that. So basically it's a big problem. And definitely there is a bigger problem even for the supervision of continuous learning systems. Meaning that if you're going to put an AI system somewhere, and this AI system would still acquire data and improve itself over time, how are you going to control that? How do you make sure that nobody gave adversarial examples to this CAD system so that its performance becomes very poor? Okay, it's very difficult. So basically, these things are unique challenges in biomedical engineering, at least for the people who are actually intending to go for a product. So basically, we have to consider these things early on, and we have to follow what the regulatory agencies are thinking about so that we can ready to prepare our solutions in the right way. Basically, here I just want to point out that basically we have what's called the technology hype curve. People in every technology, whenever a technology comes out, people start thinking that this technology will do everything. After a while, they think that actually it's not doing exactly what we thought. It's actually, we expected it to do this and that, and basically didn't do either. Okay, so basically some articles actually started coming out with this kind of statement. After years of hype, many people feel AI has failed to deliver. Okay, which is actually what's basically represented in the technology hype cycle. In every technology, you have something that looks like this, basically. You have the innovation trigger where the technology actually starts, okay? And then the applications or basically the expectations soar or basically become really very steep, okay, at this stage, basically. And you end up with what's called a peak of inflated expectations. Meaning that at this point here, you have basically you expect this technology to do everything. I saw that before in many applications, basically. I saw that for the neural network, the initial neural networks, basically in the early 90s, for example. People expected the simple neural networks to do everything. And basically, they ended up a few years later to be very abandoned. Basically, they were abandoned for a few years, and then deep learning basically pushed it back, basically, when the technology of deep learning that basically revived the neural network technologies, basically. I saw that with wavelets, for example, okay? People also, when wavelets came out, they thought wavelets will actually do a lot of things or basically do most of the things that people would want to do in signal processing, for example. But actually, right now, they are basically not like that. Basically, people realize that they have to have realistic expectations. Unfortunately, whenever you have inflated expectations and the technology fails to deliver, then you're basically end up in a what's called trough of disillusionment. You're disappointed really of the technology, and at this point here, you think that the technology will not do anything, basically. It's a failed technology, we should abandon it. But this is incorrect, actually. The right thing to do is basically start thinking about the technology with realistic expectations. So basically, we have here what's called slope of enlightenment. Enlightenment meaning that you start basically looking at the pros and cons of the technology and slowly but surely actually reach something called the plateau of productivity. Here, you basically, you're talking about the realistic expectation that can be delivered. Okay, this is the stage where you have products out of whatever technology that you have. This is the hype cycle for 2020. As you see here, deep neural networks are basically slipping out of the peak of inflated expectation. They are right here, right now. Okay, machine learning starts slipping a little bit more. Okay, so basically they are coming here very soon, basically. But we know that these things are very useful. They have very good applications, but they are not the universal applications or the perfect performance that we expected when we were here, for example. Okay, so basically we should start right away to basically try to understand the limitations of each one of these and try to have realistic expectations so that we can end up in the plateau of productivity very soon. Usually, it's better for us to work here in these two areas, basically. We have to have what's called the early part here, which is the innovators part, where people can actually shape the technology. Here we're talking about the slope of enlightenment. We talk about early adapters. Early adapters are the people who actually realize the potential of the technology and also the limitations, and basically started doing actual production or actual product development using that technology. Okay, so basically this is also very good. If you catch on with the technology a little bit later, then you basically missed out on this technology. You probably wait for the next technology then, okay? So basically, it's better to, whenever a technology comes out, we don't just think about the potential, we think about also the limitations so that we can get started right away, you know, in product development rather than hyped expectations. One of the best applications of AI that I actually see in biomedical engineering is in the biomedical data cybersecurity, basically. For the cybersecurity, we heard during the pandemic, actually, that many healthcare facilities were hacked by hackers, basically. Whether it's ransomware or otherwise, this can be a very big problem. And basically, now we are using things like PACS, we're using telemedicine, things of that sort. So they can be interrupted very easily with a hack. Basically, if you have basically a computer hack or something like that, it can basically interrupt the services, the medical services, for unknown periods of time, and basically can cause basically harm to patients. Actually, the first patient that died out of a hack was in Germany in last year. So basically, this is dangerous. Basically, for the data, you know, the data that comes in and out of hospital, these are huge amounts of data. They are literally big data, where you have very large volumes, very high velocity. Basically, the streaming data are going at very high rates, and you have variety of data. Okay, variety meaning that you have different kinds. You have images, you have signals, you have reports, you have all kinds of things. So basically, you have the basic definition of big data is there. In order for a human being to observe all of these, it's extremely difficult. AI systems can actually be trained to catch the, or basically be used in defense, cybersecurity defense mechanisms. Okay, and basically this is one of the big applications that I see for AI in biomedical engineering, in addition to the other applications that we talked about. But this actually will catch on and will be very major improvement actually to the cybersecurity of medical facilities. So in conclusion, the use of AI should not be in simple tasks where simpler tools work well, because basically it doesn't make sense to use deep learning network with millions of parameters where we can actually do a regression model that has 1 or 2 parameters and that's it. AI has a great potential in biomedical engineering, especially with big data. The role of AI should be to assist, not to replace humans in biomedical engineering. The limitations of AI solutions should be clearly outlined and understood in order for us to actually realize the potential of such solutions. The lack of standardized terminology in AI can be misleading and confusing and should be actually addressed as soon as possible. The regulation and governance of AI technology in biomedical engineering they both remain a challenge that needs to be addressed. Avoid technology hype and plan early for realistic mainstream adoption. And we have an opportunity in AI now to join innovators and early adapters. Thank you very much.